all of this land on which we now reside and call home once belonged to the various tribes of what we named the Ohlone people. It is up to us to see how we will reconcile and honor them in our use of this unceded land. The second bell calls us into relationship with ourselves and with one another, that we learn to be good stewards of the seeds that were planted for the purpose of interdependence long before we arrived here. And the third calls us into relationship with our children and our children's children, out to the seventh generation, helping us to realize that what we do now or what we fail to do will be felt by those who come after us.
Good morning. It's nice to see so many people here. All right. If you're like me, you receive many requests for donations from worthy causes over the course of a year. And what I tend to do is collect them up, and then I think about my budget and I try to decide how I'm going to allocate my funds. Charities and nonprofits and other kinds of organizations that don't meet certain criteria might get tossed immediately. For example, if there's any investment in coal or guns or tobacco. And I also look at the percentage of their funds that actually go to the cause as opposed to marketing and promotion and administration. And then I wean my pile down a bit, and then I might think about what I value: wildlife preservation, justice, climate control. I always reserve some funds for local organizations under the idea that you think globally, but you act locally. And in the end, the donations that make me feel the best are the ones that touch me personally in some way, like the library that was there for my kids to encourage their love of reading, or the organization for human rights that was there when I couldn't afford a doctor. So as we gather to worship this morning, I want you to think about what you value most. Do you value thoughtful presentations? How much is it worth to you to have a supportive community? How much is it worth to have music every week? How much does it mean to you to be part of a group that works to make the world better?
Good morning. Welcome to Mission Peak Unitarian Universalist Congregation. My name is Annette Bringen, and I'm a member of the board. We are so glad you joined us this morning. Unitarian Universalism is a radically inclusive, non-doctrinal, non-dogmatic, open-minded, and open-hearted faith. We are all coming at truth from different paths. We gather together across different identities, experiences, and beliefs to affirm and promote the inherent worth of every person. Together, we work to love this world, to heal the hurt in ourselves and one another, and to be the change we'd like to see in the world. Maybe you're here for the first time. If so, we are glad to welcome you. We will shortly post a link in the online chat to our welcome email, welcome@mpuuc.org, and to our weekly newsletter so that you can see upcoming events. We encourage you to join anything that speaks to you. We use the chat online or our Joys and Concerns book by the door here to share short and significant personal milestones, which will be read aloud later in the service. We have social hour after the service, where we get to visit with one another in breakout rooms or on the patio. The worship host will give you more information about this immediately after the service. We ask that you please silence your electronic devices. Masks are required inside and outside of Cole Hall, and N95 masks are recommended. There are masks available at the welcome table if you need one. Food and drink may only be consumed outside. Because vaccinated people can still spread the disease to others, we strongly encourage those in contact with unvaccinated or immunocompromised people to attend services outside or via Zoom. There is more information about our safety policy on the bulletin board to your left and in Week on the Peak. I have a couple of announcements for you today. The Mission Peak Canvas has launched. Everyone should have received their Canvas launch email on Thursday evening. If you haven't read it yet, please check your email. That email has the link to the Canvas webpage at mpuuc.org and to all the information you will need to participate in this important community event. This year, we are conducting Canvas in Zoom pledge parties during March and here today at Cole Hall. The sign-up form for the parties is in the email and on the webpage. Please sign up for the pledge party of your choice today if you haven't already done so. You'll be contacted by your host when we know what party you plan to attend. Thank you for your participation. The joint FUMC, the Methodists, and Mission Peak Men's Breakfast Group is restarting. They will meet at Suju's Coffee sometime in April. If you are interested, sign up at the welcome table or contact Steve Walcave. If you hear or see something in this morning's service that inspires you, makes you laugh, or brings you hope, please share it on social media or just tell a friend. We are trying to start a wave of love and justice with every gathering. Thank you for joining us.
For sorrow we must bear, for failures pain
Reciting these words, oopsie. Okay. Please join with me in reciting these words which call us together as a community of Unitarian Universalists all across the globe. We light this chalice to remind ourselves, treat all people kindly, because we are all one family, to take good care of the earth, because it is our home, to live lives full of goodness and love, because that is how we will become the best people we can be.
Oops. Good morning. It is story time. One of my favorite parts of the service, and this morning we have one of my favorite stories. It is a Persian folktale about a very old man who lived on the top of a hill at the edge of a bustling village below. The village was filled with good people and good possibilities, but it was also filled with struggles and doubts and choices. Some in the village knew the old man on top of the hill as a wise elder, a holy man of sorts. Others, especially the great skeptics, thought he was just crazy. But he awoke every morning at dawn and looked out over the entire village and surveyed everything that was going on and took notes of all the little connections that were being formed in between people and all the struggles they had and all the separations they endured. And then he closed his eyes and he prayed most of the day. Well, it was like that one morning when he heard the sound of hurried footsteps running toward him. "Master, Master, is it true?" a voice cried out. "Do you have a gift for me?" The sage opened his eyes, and standing right before him was a young man who was dressed in rags, kind of a peasant boy. The young man was very excited. His eyes beamed with wonder. "What truth do you seek?" asked the sage. The young man bowed to the elder sage and then began to speak. "I had a dream last night, and in my dream I came to the edge of the village atop the hill and met a sage. And in my dream, this sage gave me a precious jewel. You are the only one who could possibly enter my dreams, so I came to ask you, do you have a gift for me?" "Ah," replied the sage, as he reached down into a clump of grass right in front of him and pulled out a ruby the size of his fist. "You must mean this. I found it. I don't know where, but I don't have any use for it. Here, you may have it." The young man's face got ecstatic. His eyes became wide. Never had he held more than 2 copper coins in his hand at the same time. And he had never seen a jewel, much less much less held one in his hand. He shook with joy, overwhelmed by the size of the ruby. He blinked, struggling to believe his great fortune, and then, forgetting himself, without even thanking the sage, he turned to run down the hill, still holding the ruby tightly in his fist, unable to take his eyes off of it. Thank you, Graham. When he finally got to his small cottage, he placed that large ruby on the table, and he pulled up the one chair that he owned, and he sat all day viewing his treasure. He turned the stone this way and that and watched the light gleam off of it, slowly, reverently stroking his great gift over and over as the hours passed. And soon night came, and he took the ruby and he put it under his pillow. But that night he tossed and he turned. The young man had a great difficulty falling asleep. And he didn't. He eventually got up very, very early at dawn, just like he had done the day before when he awoke from the dream. And just like the morning before, he climbed the hill, this time with the ruby in his pocket. And he again ran up to the sage on top of the hill. And when he finally found him, the young peasant pulled the ruby out of his pocket and then held it out to the sage. And he said, "I don't want this." At first, it seemed like an unbelievable gift until I recognized that you offered me this when you possess an even more valuable gift. It is the other gift that I want. So here, take this ruby. I want whatever it is that allowed you to give me the ruby so easily in the first place, because that is the greater of the gifts that you have to offer. And the sage smiled, looking down upon the young man's face, who he knew yearned for truth even greater than wealth. And that is our story for this morning.
Good morning. I'm having a hard time today because sitting in the back of the room is Rod and Elkie for the last time. Thank you for being part of our community. Okay, got that over with. Good morning, I'm Valerie Stewart, a member of Mission Peak for over 25 years. This year I volunteered as our Canvas coordinator for the first time. And that made me wonder why. Why, if I've worked to sustain Mission Peak as a community for all this time, why didn't I do this before? I'd helped with Canvas, for sure, in many ways that Mr. Rogers would call a helper. So I stepped up this year because this is a moment that matters for Mission Peak. Sorry. The pandemic, aging of our members, me included, so many things have us in a different place than we were in just 5 or 6 or 7 years ago when we were growing into a larger community. For those of you who might remember, this was our leap into faith, event here in their yard, Reverend Barbara, and we were full of hope, and we built gardens and we built community, and then we hit a pandemic. It's important to me that we remain in community together. We are our beloved community. We come together every Sunday. We see each other's faces, either here or folks up on the monitor or folks on their home screens. We meet in small groups during the week and during the month for social justice, for spiritual growth, poetry, fun, music, and to be together. I think we are a hopeful people. We are a community that does want to bring love and generosity and kindness actively into the world. During this moment with our campus campaign, we must come together to decide how to continue the life of our community. We'll discuss our covenant together and our values and the vision that makes us Mission Peak in our pledge parties. This moment for Mission Peak matters. Our financial support for our beloved community is necessary to continue to be in community. During the Canvas campaign, we'll talk about the operational status of Mission Peak and our vision informed by our values and why our financial generosity is so important. Each of us demonstrates our commitment to Mission Peak through generosity of time, compassion, money, and most of all, love. At the funeral mass I attended last night for a longtime colleague from my work life, the priest offered up words from Mother Teresa that spoke to me. Not everyone can do great things in the world, but everyone can do what they can do with great love. We all have great love for this beloved community. What we do together in this moment that matters now depends on us. Please sign up for a pledge party if you haven't. And thank you to those who are attending the pledge party today. And let's go forward together.
We come together every Sunday and all throughout the week for more than ourselves. We come to support one another and the ministries that infuse worth and dignity into our church, our youth, our programs of learning and leadership, and our ministries in the larger world, including our efforts towards anti-racism and anti-oppression. Please make a contribution toward these worthy causes by mailing your check to Mission Peak UU Congregation at the address on the screen. You can also use the bill pay option in your online banking, or drop your check in the Mission Peak mail slot over here, or pay online with a credit or debit card. Thank you for supporting, oops, I'm supposed to wait for the screen. There we go. Thank you for supporting and sustaining the efforts of our members, friends, and staff. Your contributions make loving, learning, and leadership more possible.
One of the things that allows us to find hope and meaning, especially in the times that are confusing or difficult, is the love and the support that we find here among one another, kindred spirits who have some piece of our life in their heart. If you have a joy or a concern that would be aided by some encouragement or resilience by being listened to from this community, we invite you to write it briefly in the chat or real quickly in this book, and it will be spoken aloud. If you would like to drop a stone in our stone garden silently while the music plays, we will hold you in our hearts. If your need is more personal, we invite you to call up myself or Reverend Barber or anyone on the encouragement committee for a conversation and some tea, sympathy, and solace.
We're going to do this fun silently because
These are the joys and the sorrows in the hearts of this community today. Thank you for gathering together and trusting one another with your hearts. And this last stone for all of the joys and concerns still too tender to escape the silent sanctuary of our hearts, may we, for the sake of one another, keep our arms, our doors, our hearts, and our minds open. Please join with me in the spirit of this reflection. Matilda and Bert got married sometime in the spring of about 1875, and they lived a very happy life together. They were enjoying the twilight of their years together when the Great Depression hit. They lived very frugally in a quaint, small Midwestern town for a number of years. They loved each other very much. At least, they thought they did, until the day they went to the Blue County Hill Fair. At the fair, they came across a young man sitting next to one of those new fandangled fancy open cockpit aeroplanes with a sign beside it that read, "Ride for two, $5. Matilda saw that sign and she turned to Bert. She said, "You know, I sure would like to take one of those fancy new airplane rides before I die." To which Bert grumbled, "I don't think so. $5 is $5. "But Bert," Matilda cried, "we're almost 80 years old. We might never get a chance again to fly in one of those fancy airplanes." To which Bert again grumbled, "I don't think so. $5 is $5. Well, it was at that point that the young man, who was the pilot, having overheard the conversation, piped up, said, "I'll tell you folks what, I'll take the two of you up in my airplane ride for nothing, absolutely free. But there's one catch. You can't say nothing. If I hear even one peep from either of you while we're in the air, you owe me $5. That means you can't scream or yell or even gasp. If you do, you pay full price." Well, that sounded like a bargain even to Bert. And so up in the plane they climbed. Well, the pilot, being a former barnstormer, was pretty confident he could get the old couple to scream, and he tried every trick he had up his sleeve. He did steep ascents and dives. He let that plane stall. He wove around telephone poles. He did barrel rolls, loop-de-loops, and spins. But Bert and Matilda didn't say one single word. And after 20 minutes, the pilot finally accepted defeat and brought the plane in for a landing. And while they were taxiing down the runway, he turned back to Matilda and said, "Well, I guess you got that plane ride for free. I did everything I could possibly do to get you to say something, but I didn't hear even one peep." To which Matilda replied, "Well, I was going to say something when Bert fell out of the plane. But then again, $5 is $5. I want to point out that the choir wanted to dedicate that anthem to Ingrid Ju's mother, Wang Guiying, who had passed away last month. The choir had asked Ingrid to honor her mother by helping learn a song from her culture and tradition. And she came up with that song, which also happens to be in our hymnal. Ingrid helped to teach the Mandarin to the choir, and it was lovely. Well, I guess you got that plane ride for free. I did everything I could to get you to say something, but I didn't hear even one peep. To which Matilda replied, well, I was going to say something when Bert fell out of the plane, but then again, $5 is $5. I told you that story so I could tell you this one. It's similar, but takes place about 50 years after Matilda and Bert learned their lesson, and not in Blue County, but in Los Angeles, with a little boy about 7 years old. He had been sitting with his mother and older brother at the kitchen table one night, but suddenly he got up from the table and went to his room and didn't come back. A sudden urge had seized him to go into his room and to take a true accounting of his life, one that didn't seem to lead to the bottom line he was hoping for. When he got to his room, he looked up onto the dresser and saw the round glass piggy bank. It was the size of about a small grapefruit and shaped like a pig and glass, so you could see how much money was inside. Inside that glass piggy bank was his net worth, such as it was, mostly pennies, which felt a little disheartening because he wanted to feel like he was worth more than pennies. And he was, because there was a smaller, less conspicuous wooden pirate treasure box hidden underneath merit badges and old detention slips, and in that box lay the rest of his money. Quarters and dimes that he'd stashed away, a silver dollar that he'd gotten for Christmas, and 2 $1 bills. It added up to just about $5. Not much, but not bad either for a 7-year-old in 1969. That young man stood over that small box of money for what seemed like an eternity. He was caught up in a powerful deliberation, that painful, sweating brow kind of deliberation. And although it may sound as though it was a financial deliberation, it was not. It was a spiritual one. I know the details of that little boy's experience and all of his thoughts as he got up from the kitchen table, because that little boy was me. I have relived that moment so many countless times since then, and I can tell you exactly what doubt and despair feels like when it bears down upon you. What started that deliberation was the fact that when I got up from the kitchen table, the conversation that we were having was not over. The subject, as you might have guessed, was about money. It had to do with how much, or rather, how little we had. Times were tight for us as a family back in 1969. The particular crisis I can't even remember, but there was a whole laundry list of items that came up on the chopping block. And the tone of the conversation was rather dire. It was a time when my mom, a teacher for LA Unified Schools, had been on strike for about 3 months. My sister had just finished a series of unexpected medical operations. My brother and I were outgrowing our clothes like crazy. My parents were newly divorced, and both of them were already working 2 jobs to give us as much as they could. Although we never considered ourselves poor, we were making decisions about necessities, not luxuries. The other details just sort of blurred together, but this one I remember with great clarity. At one point in the conversation, when my mom's attempt to convey the seriousness of our situation really came through, a deep silence fell between the 3 of us. It seemed as though there was nothing left to say. And as the silence became profoundly unbearable, my brother got up and left my mother and me at the table. He came back just a moment later, and he was holding a small wooden box. My mom and I recognized it right away. It was his wooden treasure box of money, identical to mine. It contained his money from mowing the lawn and birthdays and washing cars and recycling Coke bottles and Christmas. He opened his box and revealed that it had almost $14. He was much better at saving money than I was. And suddenly, my mom and I sensed what was coming, and we braced ourselves. And sure enough, he just pushed that box in front of my mom. I stared wide-eyed, and I could feel a lump in my throat, even at 7 years old, and I looked over at my mom, and I noticed that her eyes had begun to well up. Just a few minutes earlier, she had a whole lot to say about the money we didn't have. But now, with that box in front of her, tears just rolled down her face, and she couldn't say anything. But you know what? She didn't do anything about it. She just let him push that box in front of her. It was me who did something. I got up and I went to our room, the same room my brother had just been in. I walked to our dresser and I looked at my piggy bank. And then I pulled out my own box of money. And I stood there, and I stood there, and I stood there. It was one of the greatest moments of deliberation I have ever experienced. Calculating what was in my box, $5, and what was in my heart. Today is the day we launch our annual stewardship campaign at Mission Peak. And I know that a good stewardship sermon always includes a story about extraordinary generosity. One about being so moved by a brother's generous example that it inspired his little brother to gather all of his money and carry it to the table and offer it up in one selfless act of benevolence and generosity so as to make their poor mother cry, ending with everyone sitting at the table, holding hands and giving thanks, a real Walton family moment. So I guess this isn't a very good stewardship sermon, because that's not what happened. Instead, this story is about how I stood there paralyzed in my bedroom, staring into my box, trying to summon that very benevolence and generosity my brother had just demonstrated, but being completely unable to do so. Being trapped in doubt and fear, and finally closing the box and mumbling to myself, well, $5 is $5. And then retreating further into my bedroom and further into my heart. It was a very difficult thing deciding to hold on to that money, not because anyone ever shamed me about that. In fact, it was almost 30 years before anyone in my family knew anything about how I struggled on that day. The hardest part, the part that stayed with me every day for the next 30 or 40 years and left me feeling lost and adrift, was that I could not even summon the courage to return back to the kitchen table. I couldn't get myself to follow my brother's generous example, and I didn't believe I could show up without it. And so I just stayed in my room alone. It's time now in our community to talk about money. And perhaps, like some of you, there's a part of me that wishes it wasn't. There's a part of me that feels the trepidation of tender moments in the past. Mixed feelings from my complicated relationship with money. Some experiences remembered with reassurance of pride, and some more with fear or shame. Because of that, there's a part of me that wishes that money was not an issue in religious communities. It's hard to take matters of the spirit and discuss their financial relevance, to put a price tag on belonging, a dollar amount on what it means to be part of the common good, count the cost of claiming something larger than ourselves, or the value of learning to live above our fears. I would like to think that everything that we do here belongs in the arena of spiritual deliberation, not financial. Many of us here, if we were honest, find financial conversations to be somewhat awkward, which is why we hate telemarketers soliciting donations. Why we refrain from walking down the street where we know people will have their hand out. Why we give an extra wide berth to those enthusiastic Girl Scouts outside of the grocery store. And of course, why we feel even just a little bit of relief if we can manage to skip church on the morning of the annual stewardship sermon. But there is also a good reason why we should talk about money, especially at church, because there is a crossroads where our spiritual decisions and our financial decisions intersect. And it's at that intersection we often find the true cornerstone of our faith and our relationships. Now, you and I both know that it's true, and there are many people, I'm guessing, here, like me, who are partial to the Psalms of St. Lennon and St. McCartney, who tell us, money can't buy you love. And I agree. Although money certainly has unquestionable value, love and relationship clearly deserves the greater ranking in the hierarchy of allegiance. So why even bother to talk about it? To answer, let me ask a few questions. Have you ever had occasion to fly across the country to be with someone who needed you desperately? Send flowers to keep a relationship from meltdown? Needed to take your son to the ball game to see his hero? Have to take your daughter to the emergency room to treat her for a broken leg? Offer one of your children treatment for an addiction after they tried to use drugs to mend a broken heart? Ever buy your spouse a coat or a more reliable car because your heart demanded reassurance that they be safe and warm? Are those not decisions of love? And is money not a central issue in each one of those decisions? Now, I will agree, it is possible to show love, to find love, to offer love, even to make love without it costing a dime. But try to sustain that love over the long haul, in the tough moments and the tender spaces of this real world without spending any money. Try to keep love from growing anemic without any budget, and you will find it very difficult to keep what connects you to this person or this place alive and vital. And if you ever have the misfortune of coming across to the object of your affection as loving and protecting your money over and above loving and protecting your relationship, and you will quickly find yourself in free fall, ejected out of that great aeroplane of love without your beloved saying even one word. That is the lesson Bert and Matilda learned. And maybe it's just me, but when you fail to call out that your husband just fell out of the plane, there's not a whole lot of love lost there. Ironically, there wasn't a whole lot of money lost either. A few years ago, historian and financial planner Barbara Wilder wrote a book called Money is Love. Her goal was to share the original historical use of money, that it was created to consecrate a covenant between two peoples who were exchanging goods and services. It was intended not so much to protect the goods and services as to protect the relationship and the trust and the fairness that prevailed between those two people, so that the connection between them remained strong and true. Wilder admitted when she first shared this original concept about money with people that they found it hard to swallow. Spend any time in our staunchly capitalistic culture and you will know what it feels like for money to stop being a symbol of relationship and love and start becoming a substitute for it. Over time, money has developed a connotation of distrust. She writes, quote, "Today, the word money is connected with other words like loot and bling and booty. It carries a connotation of excess, of selfishness, of greed, of graft. It is not about trust or values or connection so much. Today it can feel very confusing to talk about money, to hold on to it for the reassurance and security it offers. Do we think of people as threats to our money? Think of our money as a way to influence or manipulate? And then wonder why we don't feel as connected to people as we'd like? Reassurance, trust, cooperation, the feeling of being cared for, part of something larger. Where is that on our balance sheet? On that day, when my brother pushed all of his money in front of our mom, I could tell you she wanted very much to tell him to keep it. She wanted to say that we didn't need it that badly. And the truth is, we didn't. The truth is that $14 made absolutely no difference to our finances whatsoever. But the larger truth was that it made a huge difference to my brother. My brother wasn't giving all of his money because we needed it. He was giving it because he needed us. He was giving it to feel like he was part of something that he knew deep down was more important than money. He was giving it to feel like he was part of something that he longed for, part of the family, part of the solution, part of something greater than himself. And my mom, because she knew he wanted to know he was worth more than $14, just let him. The money was just pennies, but what it bought was priceless. What I learned from that lesson changed me forever. I wouldn't be saying any of this to you today if the days following that moment had not built up in me 40 years of compounded interest of struggle and grief. I wouldn't be saying any of this to you if I didn't love you the way that I do and love this community and Unitarian Universalism. The real reason that I tell you this is because I know two things. I know that you love this community even more than I have. And I know you struggle also with the awkward, unavoidable confusion that wells up in your hearts when asked to be true to your money and true to the people and values that you love, both at the same time. I think we both know the pain and paralysis of spiritual incarceration. And I just want you to have a shorter sentence than I wound up serving. Look for the door when you are given these choices. Look for the door of love and connection, and you will be amazed at the way everything begins to appear more obviously valuable. The reason being because you learn how to show up for it. A couple of weeks ago, we had a service here called 30 Days of Love. That's what I invite us to do now. to enter into 30 days of this canvas, 30 days of love, to survey everything you love and ask yourself how you show up for that love and how that love might become a reflection of who you are in this world. When you are asked to come to a dessert party and talk about these conversations, say yes, knowing it is a chance to come back to the table and finish a conversation you started years earlier about love. The day I watched my brother push all of his money toward our mom began one of the most powerful, ongoing spiritual deliberations I've known. 52 years ago, when I walked away from that table, I started serving a long and what turned out to be wrongful sentence of self-doubt and spiritual isolation. I discovered over time that's not who I really was. To this day, I can't remember what I did with that $5. I have absolutely no recollection whatsoever. But I have spent every day wishing that I had chosen differently. Knowing it certainly would have been the best $5 I ever spent. Today, I know to what I am really true and how I want to show up and for what I want to be known. I ask you to follow me there to the glory of life.
Right. Please join me in reciting these words to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Dear friends, place one hand on your heart and the other in a pledge of solidarity with the interdependence and the love everywhere. You can even direct these back to Rod and Elke if you want to take them on their way. Remember the wise words of the elder on the hill who reminded us that money is a lot like manure. Piled up in one place, it stinks like hell. But spread around, it will eventually reveal a fragrance of all the fruits and flowers of heaven. Be good stewards of the heavenly places that you are part of. Amen, and blessed be.